Can a Formula One team survive an internal war between two drivers who are 1/1000ths apart in each race? Lando Norris arrived in Abu Dhabi with the real possibility of becoming world champion for the first time. But he was not alone in that fight. Max Verstappen, always on the lookout, still had options. And the most unusual thing, Oscar Piastri, within the same team, arrived with open mathematics to be champion. It was an unprecedented situation. And if anyone within McLaren thought they should intervene to secure one's title over the other, that order was never given. On the other hand, Andrea Stella opted for the philosophy of absolute equality. And that, in a sport like Formula One, where egos are measured in thousandths and races are decided by strategic decisions, was as risky as it was admirable. In that context, what happened on the first lap of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was not a simple overtaking. It was the culmination of a narrative that had been brewing for more than 20 weekends. Piastri overtook Norris with a clean, precise, and most importantly, permitted maneuver. Because McLaren did not want to stop the battle. He didn't want to favor anyone. They opted to let their drivers resolve the championship like true gladiators, with the tires on the asphalt. And that's just the beginning. From inside the McLaren pit, the 2025 season was not a straight line to success. It was a constant battle of emotional management, of decisions that seemed harmless at the moment, but that could alter the internal balance of an entire team. What the world saw from the outside as a stellar season, inside the team was experienced as a taut rope ready to break at any moment. And not because of a technical problem or lack of competitiveness, but because of the crossfire that was generated every time Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris shared the track. At the races, the rivalry became palpable. The first warning sign came in Singapore. During an intense fight for third position, both drivers ended up with minor contact. It wasn't a spectacular crash, but it was enough to set off all the alarms in the garage. No one told them publicly, but many within McLaren knew they were crossing an invisible line. And later in Austin it happened again. A hand-to-hand duel, clean but at the limit, which forced Andrea Stella and Zak Brown to sit down with both drivers and draw clear limits. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a silent warning. A poorly managed internal battle can cost championships. What made this rivalry so difficult to control was its unpredictable nature. There was no clearly dominant driver. There were no official hierarchies. Equality was brutal. Every time one of them found a rhythm in one session, the other responded in the next. And although they were publicly united, within each lap thrown there was an implicit tension. The need to be number one, not only in the championship, but in the team itself. That tension reached its most critical point in Abu Dhabi, the final scene of a war without bullets. During the decisive weekend, the team made one of the most controversial and risky decisions of the year, allowing complete racing freedom on the first lap. Stella explained it calmly, but her words reflected the magnitude of the challenge. We knew that Oscar might try to pass Lando at the exit. We didn't want to avoid it, but we did ask them to be more careful than ever. This was not a decision made lightly. McLaren knew that in that maneuver he could lose everything. But they also knew that if they stifled competition, they were betraying their philosophy. And it happened. Piastri, on hard tires, made a perfect start and overtook Norris on the first lap. There was no nervousness on the pit wall. There were no contradictory orders. It was a clean maneuver, spoken, assumed, and that is what made it so powerful. Because it showed that even at the most critical moment of the season, McLaren was betting on mutual trust between its drivers. It wasn't about favoring one. It was about using both as living strategic tools in a war that also involved Verstappen and Red Bull. The most fascinating thing is that this play, which on another team could have been seen as an act of insubordination, was accepted by Norris. He knew that allowing Piastri to lead with the hards opened an opportunity to control the race from a distance. It was a chess maneuver. While Max Verstappen tried to push from behind, McLaren forced Red Bull to wear down its pace to avoid being caught by a Piastri with longer tire life. A strategic double game that required maturity, composure, and absolute synchronization between the wall and the pilots. But the conflict never completely disappeared. Throughout the season, even in the calmest moments, any team order, any change in strategy priority, any choice of tires, could be interpreted as favoritism. And that forced McLaren to live under constant media, technical, and emotional pressure. Decisions couldn't just be right, they had to appear fair. There was no room for error in communication. A poorly worded comment could fuel rumors. A poorly understood radio could escalate in the press. And in an era where every gesture is magnified on social media, McLaren operated in a minefield, knowing that any spark could set the narrative of impartiality on fire. What held it all together was a combination of quiet leadership and an internal culture that Stella and Brown had cultivated for years. A culture that was committed to transparency, collaboration, and mutual trust. Every week, private meetings were held between the drivers and the team leaders. They were not tactical sessions. They were exercises in emotional balance. Moments to say what they thought, what they felt, and prevent egos from hurting the common project. Andrea Stella knew that handling two title contenders without intervening required more than confidence. It required design. And this is how one of the most subtle and sophisticated strategies of the season was created, using the combined performance of its two drivers as a weapon not only against the internal rival, but also against the external enemy, Max Verstappen and Red Bull. At the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, this philosophy was visible like never before. The team allowed Oscar Piastri to start on hard tires, while Norris opted for medium. A seemingly simple decision, but one with immense tactical ramifications. The objective was twofold: to give Piastri the opportunity to lead a long window of the race with a constant pace, and at the same time force Verstappen to respond with a high pace to avoid falling into the sub-undercut or being caught between two McLarens with divergent strategies. This was not a defensive play. It was a trap. If Verstappen focused on Norris, he risked opening the door for Piastri in the long stint. If he focused on Piastri, he could expose himself to an attack from Norris after the stoppage. McLaren designed a dilemma with no easy solution for Red Bull. And the most brilliant thing, the pilots knew it and accepted it. It was not a war between them. It was covert cooperation. A three-dimensional chess where both played on different diagonals but with the same goal: to ensure that one of the two won the championship. In Stella's own words, it was interesting to let Oscar go on the hard tires and try to chase Max. This, to a certain extent, was even in Lando's interest. This phrase, which at first glance seems like a technical justification, actually reveals a philosophical principle: the understanding that, in a scenario of extreme equality, the best defense against chaos is shared intelligence. For Norris, every duel with Piastri was a mental test. He couldn't allow mistakes because he knew that Oscar capitalized on every millimeter of advantage. In interviews after the season, Norris himself acknowledged that one of the biggest challenges of his year was not allowing that internal competition to transform into anxiety. He learned to breathe deeply, to accept that on some weekends it would not be the fastest, that the important thing was not to always win, but to know when to give in and when to attack. That emotional intelligence was what made the difference in the decisive races. On the other hand, Oscar Piastri faced a very different process. After having been the revelation of 2023 and an essential part of the Constructors' title in 2024, the Australian started 2025 with a lightning start. In Zandvoort, he led the championship with a 34-point lead over Norris. His precision in classification and his coolness in one-on-one maneuvers made him stand out as a natural contender. But after Azerbaijan, everything changed. What seemed like a sure march to the title turned into a downward spiral. Piastri began to suffer on low-grip tracks. He lost the balance of the car. I was losing confidence. And what hurts the most for a young pilot, he was beginning to question himself. It wasn't a technical problem. It was an emotional disconnection from the car. A disconnection that, if not managed well, can destroy seasons. Andrea Stella explained that Oscar needed to readjust, that the car evolved beyond his preferences, and that required a reconfiguration of its style. But it wasn't just a piloting problem. It was an internal struggle. A silent conversation between talent and doubt. During that stretch, Norris was consistent, solid, and that led him to take the lead at the key moment. Piastri and Norris were not friends in the traditional sense. They were rivals with an implicit alliance. They knew that their mutual talent made them better, that what one achieved pushed the other. And if they broke that dynamic, the entire team could collapse. That maturity, rare in such young drivers, is one of the great lessons of the 2025 season. What do you think? Was McLaren right to allow both drivers to race freely until the final lap, even risking the championship? Or do you think a more hierarchical structure would have been more effective in securing the title earlier? Team Norris or Team Piastri? What strategy should McLaren follow in 2026 to avoid breaking this delicate balance? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.